Aaron Hernandez. In August of 2012, Aaron Hernandez signed a 5-year, $40 million contract extension with the New England Patriots. He was 22 years old, a Pro Bowl alternate, and one half of the most feared tight end duo the NFL had ever seen. Less than a year later, the Patriots released him. It had nothing to do with an injury or a contract dispute. They cut him within 90 minutes of his arrest for first-degree murder. Hernandez was born on November 6, 1989, in Bristol, Connecticut. By the time he graduated high school, he had set state records for receiving yards that still stand today. At the University of Florida, he helped win a BCS national championship in 2009, and that same year, he took home the John Mackey Award as the best tight end in the country. The Patriots drafted him in the 4th round of the 2010 draft, and across 3 seasons he caught 175 passes for nearly 2,000 yards and 18 touchdowns. Alongside Rob Gronkowski, he formed the first tight end tandem in league history to each score 5 or more touchdowns in back-to-back seasons. He played in Super Bowl 46. He had everything an athlete could want. But on June 17, 2013, 27-year-old Odin Lloyd was found in an industrial park in North Attleboro, Massachusetts, about a mile from Hernandez's home. Lloyd was a semi-pro football player for the Boston Bandits and the boyfriend of Hernandez's fiance's sister. He had sustained 6 gunshot wounds. Surveillance footage from Hernandez's own home security system captured him with associates Carlos Ortiz and Ernest Wallace, leaving the residence with Lloyd in a rented Nissan Altima around 2:30 in the morning. Additional footage from the industrial park showed the Altima arriving and then departing. The trail of evidence led directly back to Hernandez's front door. How does a man with a $40 million future throw it all away on a night in June? 9 days later, on June 26, 2013, Hernandez was taken into custody at his North Attleboro home. The Patriots released him within 90 minutes. The $40 million extension was gone. The team destroyed any remaining merchandise with his name on it. The trial began on January 29, 2015, in Fall River, Massachusetts, and lasted nearly 3 months. Prosecutors presented cell tower data, surveillance timelines, and testimony from Ortiz, who took a plea deal. On April 15th of that year, the jury returned a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder and weapons violations. The sentence was mandatory under Massachusetts law: life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was 25. But the legal troubles ran deeper. His former associate Alexander Bradley had lost an eye in a February 2013 shooting in Florida and testified that Hernandez was responsible. On May 11, 2015, Hernandez was indicted for witness intimidation connected to that incident. A separate trial followed for the July 2012 drive-by that took the lives of Daniel de Abreu and Safiro Furtado outside a Boston nightclub. On April 14, 2017, defended by attorney Jose Baez, Hernandez was found not guilty of those charges. 5 days later, on April 19, 2017, Hernandez was found unresponsive in his cell at Souza Baranovsky Correctional Center. He had taken his own life. He was 27 years old. On September 21st of that year, researchers at Boston University announced that a post-mortem examination had revealed stage 3 chronic traumatic encephalopathy, what they described as the most severe case ever documented in someone his age. The finding forced an uncomfortable conversation about football and brain injury that the league had been avoiding for years. But even those researchers stopped short of calling CTE a cause of the crimes. The Lloyd case was planned and deliberate, not impulsive. CTE was a diagnosis, not a defense. After his passing, Judge Susan Garsh initially vacated the conviction under a Massachusetts legal principle called abatement ab initio, which held that a defendant who passes before exhausting appeals is rendered legally innocent. The ruling meant that, on paper, Hernandez was no longer a convicted felon. Prosecutors and the Lloyd family fought back immediately, arguing that the doctrine protected the guilty at the expense of victims. On March 13, 2019, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court reinstated the conviction and abolished that doctrine entirely, calling it no longer consistent with the circumstances of contemporary life. It was a landmark decision that changed Massachusetts law going forward. As of 2025, Aaron Hernandez's murder conviction stands. Odin Lloyd's family has never received the closure of a completed appellate process. No athlete in the modern era has fallen further or faster. And yet, what happened to Hernandez was a choice. What happened in the next case was something far more calculated, because Ray Carruth did not act in a moment of rage. He made a plan. Ray Carruth. On the night of November 16, 1999, a 24-year-old woman named Cherika Adams called 911 from the front seat of her car in Charlotte, North Carolina. She had been shot 4 times. She was 8 months pregnant, and on that call, she identified the man responsible. He was not a stranger. He was the father of her unborn child, and he played wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers. Carruth was born Ray Lamar Wiggins on January 20, 1974, in Sacramento, California. He earned first-team All-American honors at the University of Colorado in 1996 and was drafted 27th overall by the Panthers in 1997. He played 3 NFL seasons before the night that ended everything. Prosecutors laid out a deliberate scheme. On that November night, Carruth stopped his vehicle directly in front of Cherika's car on a Charlotte street, blocking her path. His accomplice, a nightclub manager named Van Brett Watkins Sr., pulled alongside in a separate vehicle and fired 4 rounds from a .357 revolver. Co-conspirators Michael Kennedy and Stanley Abraham were also charged in the plot. Cherika was rushed to the hospital, where doctors performed an emergency cesarean section. Her son, Chancellor Lee Adams, was born after his mother had been without oxygen for roughly 70 minutes, leaving him with permanent brain damage and cerebral palsy. Cherika never woke up. She fell into a coma and passed on December 14, 1999. She was 24 years old. What kind of man orchestrates the ambush of the mother of his own child? After Cherika's passing, Carruth fled. He emptied a bank account, ditched his car, and vanished. Federal authorities launched a multi-state search. They tracked him roughly 500 miles south to a neighborhood in Tennessee, where he was found hiding in the trunk of a car owned by a woman he knew. A first-round NFL draft pick curled up in a trunk, 500 miles from a crime scene. In 2001, a Charlotte jury convicted him of conspiracy to commit murder, shooting into an occupied vehicle and using an instrument to harm an unborn child. He was acquitted of first-degree murder, which spared him a potential death sentence. Defense attorney David Rudolph led his case, arguing that Carruth had not directly fired the weapon. The sentence was 18 years and 11 months to 24 years and 4 months. Including time served before trial, Carruth remained incarcerated for 18 years at Sampson Correctional Institution in Clinton, North Carolina. He was released on October 22, 2018, followed by 9 months of post-release supervision. His accomplice, Van Brett Watkins, received a far heavier sentence of 40 years and 8 months to 50 years and 8 months, and is not eligible for release until 2046. Co-conspirators Kennedy and Abraham also received prison time. Since his release, Carruth has remarried under a different surname and reportedly lives quietly in the southwestern United States. He has consistently declined to speak publicly about the crime. Before his release, he wrote a letter to the Charlotte Observer expressing what he called remorse, but he never spoke to Chirika's family directly. Chancellor Lee Adams, who survived despite everything, is being raised by his maternal grandmother, Sandra Adams, in Charlotte. He lives with cerebral palsy and requires constant care. Sandra has said publicly that she forgave Carruth, not for his sake, but for her own peace. Chancellor smiles. He communicates. He is alive because doctors acted fast enough that night in November. Chirika Adams's 911 call from that night remains one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in NFL criminal history. She identified her attacker with her own voice, even as she was fading. That recording was played for the jury. It was Chirika's testimony, delivered from a car seat in the dark, with 4 bullets in her body. Carruth's scheme cost him 18 years. The next athlete on this list lost nearly everything too, but what he did had nothing to do with another person. It had to do with what was found on his property. Michael Vick. On April 25, 2007, authorities arrived at a 15-acre property on Moonlight Road in Surry County, Virginia. They were executing a drug-related search warrant. What they found instead was something no one expected. More than 60 dogs, most of them pit bulls, along with treadmills, weighted vests, and equipment designed for one purpose. The property belonged to Michael Vick, the highest-paid player in the NFL, and it had been operating as a dog-fighting compound for 6 years. Vick was the #1 overall pick in the 2001 draft, selected by the Atlanta Falcons. He was the first African-American quarterback ever taken first overall. In 2004, he signed a 10-year, $130 million contract, the richest in NFL history at the time. He was a 4-time Pro Bowler. He set the single-game rushing record for a quarterback with 173 yards in December of 2002, and he led the Falcons to a playoff win over Green Bay that same year. But on that property in Surry County, investigators uncovered an operation called Bad News Kennels. It had been running since 2001, right under the league's nose, for the entire span of Vick's professional career. The scale was staggering. Authorities recovered fighting pits, blood-stained carpeting, and a forced breeding apparatus. Dogs that did not perform were disposed of by hanging, drowning, and electrocution. Co-defendant Tony Taylor was the first to cooperate and provided investigators with the operational details of the ring. On July 17, 2007, Vick was indicted alongside Pernell Peace, Quannas Phillips, and Taylor on federal conspiracy charges under Title 18 of the United States Code. On August 24th of that year, Vick signed a plea agreement in which he admitted to bankrolling the entire operation and participating directly in the disposal of underperforming animals. The NFL suspended him indefinitely the same day. All 3 co-defendants also pleaded guilty and received sentences ranging from 12 to 21 months. How does a man who had more money and fame than almost anyone in the sport end up in federal court over a backyard dog operation that he funded with his own wealth? On December 10, 2007, United States District Judge Henry E. Hudson handed down a sentence of 23 months in federal prison plus 3 years of supervised probation. The judge told Vic that he had been instrumental in promoting, funding, and facilitating a cruel and inhumane activity. Vic was released to home confinement on May 20th, 2009, and from federal custody on July 20th of that year. In July of 2008, while still incarcerated, Vic filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, listing $16 million in assets against more than $20 million in liabilities. The man who had signed the richest contract in NFL history was now underwater by $4 million. His revised repayment plan required him to pay creditors a sliding scale percentage of any future earnings and forced the liquidation of an unfinished home in Suffolk, Virginia. As recently as 2024, 3 creditors filed an involuntary bankruptcy petition against Vic over a disputed 2018 loan. Then came the return. The Philadelphia Eagles signed Vic before the 2009 season, a move that drew both praise and outrage from fans across the country. In 2010, he silenced the critics on the field. He led Philadelphia to a 10-6 record and the NFC East title, earned his 4th Pro Bowl selection, and was named NFL Comeback Player of the Year. He later played for the New York Jets and Pittsburgh Steelers before officially retiring in 2017. He was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame in 2025. As of December 20th, 2024, Vic was named the head football coach at Norfolk State University. His first season in 2025 ended with a 1-11 record. Vic served his time and rebuilt his career. But the next case involves a man who did not need to commit a crime against anyone. He committed one against himself in the most absurd way possible. Plaxico Burress. On February 3, 2008, Plaxico Burress caught a 13-yard touchdown pass from Eli Manning with 35 seconds left on the clock. That catch defeated the previously undefeated New England Patriots 17-14 and won Super Bowl 42. It was one of the greatest plays in NFL history. 9 months later, Burress shot himself in the leg at a Manhattan nightclub with an unlicensed handgun, and everything unraveled. Burress was born on August 12, 1977, in Norfolk, Virginia. The Pittsburgh Steelers drafted him 8th overall in the 2000 draft. Over 12 NFL seasons with the Steelers, Giants, and Jets, he caught 553 passes for 8,499 yards and 64 touchdowns. That Super Bowl catch cemented him as a New York sports legend. But on the night of November 28, 2008, Burress and teammate Antonio Pierce were in the VIP area of the Latin Quarter nightclub in Manhattan when a .40 caliber semi-automatic pistol slipped from his waistband and discharged into his right thigh. The firearm was not licensed in New York, New Jersey, or Florida. His Florida permit had expired months earlier. Pierce drove him to New York Presbyterian Hospital and arranged for the weapon to be taken to Burress's home in New Jersey. Nobody at the hospital reported the gunshot wound to police, which was required by law. When the story broke, it became a media firestorm, not because of the injury itself, but because of the legal implications of carrying an unlicensed weapon in one of the strictest gun law jurisdictions in the country. For a man whose hands were steady enough to catch a Super Bowl-winning pass, how did it come to this? The fallout was immediate and political. New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg publicly demanded full prosecution, calling it a case that had to send a message about illegal firearms in the city. Manhattan District Attorney Robert Morgenthau insisted on a minimum of 2 years behind bars. The NFL placed Burress on the non-football injury list, and the Giants suspended him for the rest of the season. On July 29, 2009, Burress took the unusual step of testifying before the grand jury himself. Days later, he was indicted on 2 counts of criminal possession of a weapon and 1 count of reckless endangerment, facing up to 3.5 years. On August 20th, 2009, Burress pleaded guilty to attempted criminal possession of a weapon. On September 22nd of that year, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison plus 2 years of supervised release. He was sent to Rikers Island and then transferred to the Oneida Correctional Facility. He served 20 months and was released on June 6, 2011. Burress returned to the NFL almost immediately after his release. He signed with the New York Jets in July of 2011 on a 1-year deal worth roughly $3 million and played 16 games that season, catching 45 passes for 612 yards and 8 touchdowns. It was a respectable comeback by any measure. He briefly returned to the Steelers in November of 2012, but a torn rotator cuff in August of 2013 effectively ended his career. He never played another NFL snap. His financial picture has been troubled since. Foreclosures, civil judgments, and a 2015 bad check case in New Jersey that resulted in $56,000 in restitution and 5 years of probation have followed him long after the football stopped. In February of 2025, Burress listed his Super Bowl 42 championship ring at auction through Heritage Auctions, with bidding opening around $35,000. That ring, the symbol of the greatest moment of his career, was now a line item in his financial recovery. Burress lost 2 years of his career and a fortune because of a gun he never should have been carrying. But the next story is on an entirely different scale. It is the most watched, most debated criminal case in American history, and more than 3 decades later, people still cannot agree on what justice looked like. O.J. Simpson. On June 17, 1994, an estimated 95 million Americans watched a white Ford Bronco crawl down Interstate 405 in Los Angeles. Behind the wheel was Al Cowlings. In the back seat was O.J. Simpson, holding a revolver to his own head. He had been charged with taking 2 lives, and instead of surrendering, he ran. When he finally gave himself up at his Brentwood estate that evening, police recovered a passport, a disguise kit with a fake mustache, and the revolver from the vehicle. Simpson was one of the most famous athletes alive. He won the Heisman Trophy at USC in 1968. Buffalo drafted him number 1 overall in 1969. In 1973, he became the first NFL player to rush for more than 2,000 yards in a single season. He was a Hall of Fame running back, a movie star in the Naked Gun franchise, and a beloved broadcaster. But on the night of June 12, 1994, his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson, age 35, and her friend Ronald Goldman, age 25, were found outside Nicole's condominium on South Bundy Drive in the Brentwood neighborhood of Los Angeles. Both had been fatally stabbed. Simpson had a documented history of domestic violence against Nicole. In 1989, he had pleaded no contest to spousal battery after police responded to a call at their home. Nicole had told officers she feared for her life. That history would become a contested backdrop to everything that followed. What followed became known as the trial of the century. It ran from January 24th to October 3rd, 1995, before Judge Lance Ito, and it consumed the nation. The prosecution, led by Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden, presented DNA evidence, a bloody glove found at Simpson's estate, and a timeline that placed him near the scene. The defense team included Johnny Cochran, F. Lee Bailey, Robert Shapiro, Alan Dershowitz, Barry Scheck, and Robert Kardashian. They challenged the handling of evidence, accused Detective Mark Furman of racial bias, and built their case around reasonable doubt. Cochran's closing argument centered on a single phrase about a glove that did not fit. After fewer than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty on both counts. An estimated 150 million Americans watched or listened to the verdict live. The reactions split the country along racial and cultural lines in ways that are still studied today. With a criminal acquittal behind him, was justice truly finished with O.J. Simpson? It was not. A separate civil trial ran from October of 1996 through February of 1997. The burden of proof was lower, and Simpson was compelled to testify. A different jury found him liable for the wrongful deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman, and ordered him to pay $33.5 million in compensatory and punitive damages to the families. The distinction matters. In the criminal case, he was acquitted. In the civil case, he was found responsible. The bulk of the judgment has never been collected. Simpson moved to Florida, where state law shielded his pension and primary residence from creditors. Then came Las Vegas. On September 13, 2007, Simpson and 5 other men entered a room at the Palace Station Hotel where memorabilia dealers Bruce Fromong and Alfred Beardsley were displaying items Simpson claimed had been stolen from him. He took the items at gunpoint. He was arrested 3 days later. On October 3, 2008, exactly 13 years to the day after his California acquittal, a Clark County jury found him guilty on all 12 counts, including armed robbery and kidnapping. On December 5th of that year, Judge Jackie Glass sentenced him to a maximum of 33 years with eligibility for parole after 9. The irony was impossible to ignore. A man who had walked free from a double homicide charge was going to prison for trying to recover sports memorabilia from a hotel room. Simpson served his sentence at Lovelock Correctional Center in Pershing County, Nevada. On July 20, 2017, the Nevada Board of Parole Commissioners voted unanimously to grant his release. He walked out on October 1, 2017, at the age of 70. In December of 2021, he was granted early discharge from parole supervision. He settled in the Summerlin neighborhood of Las Vegas. O.J. Simpson passed on April 10, 2024, at the age of 76. The cause was cancer. His family announced his passing on his social media account the following day. The Goldman and Brown families never received the full civil judgment. The criminal acquittal still divides the country, and the Bronco chase remains one of the most surreal moments ever broadcast on American television. Simpson's story is defined by a single question that has no consensus answer. The next story is defined by a different kind of question, one asked in a courtroom in Pretoria, South Africa, where a man who inspired the entire world claimed he mistook his girlfriend for an intruder. If you're liking this video and you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. We drop new cases every day. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Oscar Pistorius. He was called the Blade Runner, and for a while he was one of the most inspirational athletes on the planet. A man born without fibula bones in either leg, who had both limbs amputated before his first birthday, and who went on to compete not just in the Paralympic Games, but in the Olympics themselves. Then, in the early hours of Valentine's Day 2013, Oscar Pistorius fired 4 shots through a locked bathroom door in his home near Pretoria, South Africa. Behind that door was his girlfriend, model and law graduate Reva Steenkamp. She was 29 years old. She did not survive. Pistorius was born on November 22, 1986, in Johannesburg. He competed on carbon fiber prosthetics and became the face of what human determination could look like. He won 6 Paralympic gold medals across 3 games in Athens, Beijing, and London. At the 2012 London Olympics, he became the first amputee to compete in a track event at the Olympic Games, reaching the 400-meter semi-finals and running in the 4x400-meter relay final. At the 2011 IAAF World Championships in Daegu, South Korea, he became the first Paralympian to earn a medal at an able-bodied global championship. On the morning of February 14, 2013, at his walled home in the Silver Woods Country Estate Complex, Pistorius fired 4 rounds from a licensed 9mm pistol through the locked bathroom door. He maintained from the moment of his arrest that he believed an intruder was hiding inside. Prosecutors argued otherwise. If Pistorius truly believed someone had broken into his home, why did he not check whether Riva was in bed beside him before pulling the trigger? The trial opened on March 3, 2014, before Judge Thokozile Masipa in Pretoria. It was broadcast internationally and became one of the most closely followed criminal cases in South African history. Pistorius wept openly on the stand. The prosecution presented ballistic evidence showing the trajectory of the bullets and argued that no reasonable person would fire 4 times through a door without knowing who was on the other side. The defense maintained he was a vulnerable, frightened man on stumps in the dark, terrified of the country's epidemic of home invasions. On September 12, 2014, Masipa acquitted Pistorius of murder, but convicted him of culpable homicide, the South African equivalent of manslaughter. On October 21st of that year, she sentenced him to 5 years in prison. The sentence drew immediate criticism from prosecutors and victims' rights groups, who called it shockingly lenient for taking a life. Prosecutors appealed, and on December 3, 2015, the Supreme Court of Appeal of South Africa overturned the manslaughter verdict and substituted a murder conviction. The court applied the legal principle of dolus eventualis, meaning Pistorius had foreseen the possibility that his actions could cause death and proceeded anyway. On July 6, 2016, Judge Masipa resentenced him to 6 years. Prosecutors appealed again, arguing the sentence was too lenient. On November 24, 2017, the Supreme Court of Appeal increased the sentence to 13 years and 5 months, citing the need to deter gender-based violence in South Africa. In March of 2023, the parole board denied his application, ruling he had not yet served half his sentence. The Constitutional Court subsequently ruled his eligibility should be backdated to July of 2016, when his original murder sentence began. On November 24, 2023, the parole board granted his application. Pistorius was released on January 5, 2024, leaving Atteridgeville Correctional Center quietly to avoid the media. His parole conditions, in force until December of 2029, include restrictions on movement, mandatory anger management therapy, mandatory programs on gender-based violence, an alcohol prohibition, community service, and a ban on speaking to the media. He initially moved into his uncle Arnold Pistorius's home in the Waterkloof suburb of Pretoria. As of 2025, he continues to serve parole, attends a local church, and has reportedly returned to limited competitive sport, completing the Ironman 70.3 Durban Triathlon in the physically challenged category in June of 2025, with permission from South African authorities. Riva Steenkamp's mother, June Steenkamp, has spoken publicly about the verdict and the parole. She has said that the people left behind are the ones serving a life sentence. Pistorius went from inspiring the world to standing trial for taking a life. But what happened next involves a man who was already the most feared fighter on the planet, and whose trouble started long before anyone expected it. Mike Tyson. On November 22, 1986, a 20-year-old from Brooklyn named Mike Tyson defeated Trevor Berbick to become the youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history. Within a year, he had unified the WBA, WBC, and IBF titles. He defended the unified belt 6 times. His opponents were not just losing, they were being carried off on stretchers. And then, at the height of his dominance, everything came apart. Tyson was born on June 30, 1966, in Brooklyn, New York, and was trained by the legendary Cus D'Amato. He turned professional in 1985 and tore through the heavyweight division with a ferocity that had not been seen in decades. On February 11, 1990, the aura of invincibility shattered when James "Buster" Douglas knocked him out in the 10th round in one of the biggest upsets in boxing history. His professional record would eventually stand at 50 wins, 44 of them by knockout, and 7 losses. But the losses inside the ring were nothing compared to what happened outside of it. On July 19, 1991, Tyson was a celebrity guest at the Indiana Black Expo in Indianapolis. He encountered 18-year-old Desiree Washington, the reigning Miss Black Rhode Island and a contestant in the Miss Black America pageant, at a rehearsal at the Omni Hotel. He invited her back to his room at the Canterbury Hotel in the early morning hours. Washington reported what happened to police 3 days later. The trial began on January 27, 1992, before Marion County Criminal Court Judge Patricia Gifford. After roughly 10 hours of deliberation, on February 10, 1992, the jury found Tyson guilty of criminal assault and 2 counts of criminal deviant conduct. On March 26th of that year, Judge Gifford sentenced him to 10 years with the last 4 suspended, effectively 6 years, plus 4 years of probation. For a man who could end a fight in 30 seconds, how did he end up powerless in a courtroom in Indiana? Tyson served his sentence at the Indiana Youth Center, also known as Plainfield Correctional Facility. The Indiana Court of Appeals affirmed his conviction 2-1 on August 13, 1993. The Indiana Supreme Court declined further review in March of 1994. Tyson was released on March 25, 1995, after serving approximately 3 years. He returned to boxing and regained the WBA and WBC titles in 1996. But on June 28, 1997, in a rematch against Evander Holyfield at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas, the fight descended into chaos. In the 3rd round, Tyson bit a portion off Holyfield's right ear, then bit his left ear moments later. The arena erupted. Referee Mills Lane disqualified him on the spot. The Nevada State Athletic Commission revoked his license, fined him $3 million, which was 10% of his $30 million purse and the statutory maximum, and suspended him from boxing. The license was reinstated on October 18, 1998. But the image of Holyfield's mangled ear is still the first thing people think of when they hear Mike Tyson's name. In 1999, Tyson served roughly 9 months in a Maryland jail for an assault conviction stemming from a 1998 road rage incident. The Maryland Parole Commission released him, and Indiana subsequently ended his probation. His Nevada license was revoked again in 2002 following a brawl with Lennox Lewis at a pre-fight press conference. He filed for bankruptcy in 2003, listing $23 million in debt. The man who had once earned hundreds of millions of dollars was broke. On November 15, 2024, At AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas, the 58-year-old Tyson fought 27-year-old Jake Paul in an exhibition match. Tyson lost by unanimous decision over 8 rounds, throwing 97 punches and landing just 18. The fight streamed on Netflix to an estimated 60 million households. His last professional victory had been in February of 2003. As of 2025, Mike Tyson's career record stands at 50-7. He was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 2011. The youngest champion in the sport's history spent 3 years behind bars and decades battling the consequences of his choices outside of it. The next case is not about a single moment of recklessness. It is about a pattern of violence so sustained that it followed one man from a college campus all the way to a prison cell where he would never leave. Lawrence Phillips. In January of 1996, Lawrence Phillips rushed for 165 yards and 2 touchdowns in the Fiesta Bowl, helping Nebraska demolish Florida 62-24 and win a national championship. 5 months later, the St. Louis Rams selected him 6th overall in the NFL draft. He was supposed to be a franchise running back. Instead, he spent the rest of his life cycling through courtrooms and prison cells, and by the time his story ended, 2 people were gone. Phillips was born on May 12, 1975, in Little Rock, Arkansas, and was raised in the California foster care system. At the University of Nebraska, he ranks 6th all-time in rushing with 2,589 yards and helped the Cornhuskers win back-to-back national championships in 1994 and 1995. But warning signs appeared early. In the early hours after Nebraska's September 9, 1995, win over Michigan State, Phillips climbed to the 3rd-floor balcony of teammate Scott Frost's apartment and entered through a sliding door. He assaulted his ex-girlfriend, Nebraska basketball player Kate McEwen, dragging her by the hair down 3 flights of stairs and slamming her head into a mailbox. He was arrested for 3rd-degree assault. Coach Tom Osborne suspended him for 6 games, but allowed him to return for the final stretch of the season and the Fiesta Bowl. It would not be the last time someone looked the other way. Phillips played 25 NFL games across 4 seasons with the Rams, Dolphins, and 49ers. The Rams had traded Jerome Bettis to make room for him, a decision they would regret almost immediately. St. Louis released him midway through the 1997 season after repeated off-field incidents. Miami gave him a chance and let him go. San Francisco cut him in 1999. He drifted through the Arena Football League, NFL Europe, and the Canadian Football League with the Montreal Alouettes and Calgary Stampeders. But no league could hold him long enough to matter. The talent was never the problem. The violence was, and it was escalating. On August 21, 2005, after losing a pickup football game near the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, Phillips drove his vehicle onto the field and struck 3 people, including teenagers, narrowly missing 4 others. In 2006, he was convicted on 7 counts of assault with a deadly weapon. Separately, he was convicted in San Diego of choking a former girlfriend twice in 2005, once to the point where she lost consciousness. For a man who had every physical gift the sport could offer, how did the violence keep winning? In 2008, Phillips received a combined sentence of 31 years and 4 months for inflicting great bodily injury involving domestic violence, corporal injury, false imprisonment, vehicle theft, and the assault with a deadly weapon convictions. He was sent to Kern Valley State Prison in Delano, California. He would not be eligible for release until he was well into his 60s, but Lawrence Phillips would never see the outside again. On April 11, 2015, His cellmate, 37-year-old Damian Soward, who was the cousin of former NFL wide receiver R.J. Soward, was found unresponsive in their cell. The coroner determined the cause of death was strangulation. Soward had been serving 82 years to life for a 2009 first-degree murder conviction in San Bernardino County. The Kern County District Attorney charged Phillips with first-degree murder with the special circumstance of lying in wait. On January 12, 2016, a Kern County judge ruled there was sufficient evidence for trial. Phillips's attorneys said he intended to argue self-defense. He never got the chance. Hours after that hearing, early on January 13, 2016, Phillips was found unresponsive in his segregation cell. A bedsheet had been tied to a low television shelf. A note requesting no resuscitation was taped to his chest. He was 40 years old. The Kern County coroner concluded he had taken his own life. Lawrence Phillips's story began in foster care and ended in a prison cell. Every chance he was given, he answered with harm. The next case is different in almost every way, because Mookie Blaylock did not set out to hurt anyone. But someone still did not come home. Mookie Blaylock. On the afternoon of May 31, 2013, a Cadillac Escalade crossed the center line on Tara Boulevard in Jonesboro, Clayton County, Georgia, and struck a Chrysler minivan head-on. The driver of the minivan, Frank Murphy, survived. His wife, Monica Murphy, a 40-year-old mother of 5, did not. She passed hours later at Atlanta Medical Center. The man behind the wheel of the Escalade was former NBA All-Star Mookie Blaylock. Blaylock was born Darren O'Shea Blaylock on March 20, 1967, in Garland, Texas. He played 13 NBA seasons with the New Jersey Nets, Atlanta Hawks, and Golden State Warriors. He was selected to the 1994 All-Star Game and was named to the NBA All-Defensive Teams 6 times. He led the Oklahoma Sooners to the 1988 Final Four, and his jersey was retired in 2001. The Seattle band Pearl Jam was originally named Mookie Blaylock before legal concerns forced a change, and their debut album 10 was named after his jersey number. But Blaylock's life off the court had been unraveling for years. He had accumulated at least 7 prior DUI arrests before the crash, a pattern of behavior so persistent that it is difficult to call it anything other than a choice made over and over again. The most recent had been in March of 2013, just 2 months before the fatal collision, when he struck a vehicle in a grocery store parking lot and attempted to flee the scene. His license had been suspended. He drove anyway. On May 31st, on Tara Boulevard, that decision finally caught up with someone who could not get out of the way. How does someone with 7 chances to stop keep getting behind the wheel? Toxicology results from the day of the crash showed no alcohol in Blaylock's system at the time of impact. The prosecution's theory was that Blaylock suffered an alcohol withdrawal seizure while driving. The critical piece of evidence was a signed document from his physician, a written order advising Blaylock not to drive due to his seizure history. He had acknowledged that restriction with his own signature. Charges were initially filed as second-degree vehicular homicide, a misdemeanor. But after a Sandy Springs police officer notified prosecutors about the doctor's signed restriction, the charges were upgraded to first-degree vehicular homicide, a felony. That upgrade meant Blaylock was facing felony time. On October 27, 2014, Blaylock pleaded guilty to first-degree vehicular homicide and related charges. The negotiated plea was 15 years, with 7 in prison and 8 on probation. The prison portion was suspended after 3 years on conditions that included 1,500 hours of community service, twice-weekly Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, treatment for alcoholism, and a prohibition on driving for the entire 15-year period. Blaylock stood in court and apologized directly to Frank Murphy. Murphy listened. There was nothing else he could do. As of 2025, Blaylock has completed his prison term and resides in Zebulon, Georgia, a small town south of Atlanta. He remains on probation under the terms of the 15-year sentence, which runs through 2029. He cannot legally drive a car for the duration of that probation. Monica Murphy left behind 5 children and a husband who sat in that courtroom and watched the man who took her from them apologize. There is nothing that balances that ledger. Blaylock's tragedy was rooted in addiction. The final case in this series is rooted in something harder to explain, because what happened inside Jason Williams's mansion was not planned, not premeditated, and not intentional. But someone still did not walk out. Jason Williams. On the evening of February 14, 2002, former NBA All-Star Jason Williams was giving guests a tour of his roughly 30,000 square foot estate in Alexandria Township, New Jersey. At some point during the evening, in the bedroom, Williams picked up a 12-gauge Browning shotgun from his gun collection. He failed to engage the safety, snapped the weapon shut, and it discharged into the chest of limousine driver Kostas Christofi, who was standing nearby. Christofi, age 55, did not survive. What Williams did next turned a tragedy into a criminal case. Williams was born on February 22, 1968, in Ritter, South Carolina. He was drafted 21st overall by the Phoenix Suns in 1990 and was traded immediately to Philadelphia. He played 11 NBA seasons with the 76ers and the New Jersey Nets, and was selected to the 1998 All-Star Game. In 1999, he signed a 6-year, $86 million contract with the Nets. A leg injury in April of 2000 ended his playing career. He transitioned to broadcast work as an NBA analyst for NBC. On that February night, after the shotgun discharged and Christofi collapsed, witnesses testified that Williams attempted to stage the scene. He placed the gun in Christofi's hands to make it look self-inflicted. He jumped into a swimming pool to wash evidence from his body. He changed his clothes. He wiped down the shotgun. And he pressured guests at the gathering to lie to police about what they had seen. For a man whose career was already over and who had nothing left to protect but his reputation, why did he choose the cover-up over the truth? On May 1, 2002, Williams was indicted on aggravated manslaughter and 7 additional counts. After a 3-month trial that featured testimony from the guests who had witnessed the cover-up, on April 30, 2004, the jury acquitted him of aggravated manslaughter, aggravated assault, and weapons possession, but convicted him on 4 cover-up charges. Those included tampering with a witness, tampering with evidence, fabricating evidence, and hindering apprehension. The jury hung on the reckless manslaughter count, meaning they could not reach a unanimous verdict on whether the shooting itself was criminally reckless. On April 21, 2006, a Hunterdon County Appeals Court ruled he could be retried on that charge. The case dragged on for years. With the retrial finally set to begin, Williams pleaded guilty on January 11, 2010, to aggravated assault by recklessly causing bodily injury with a deadly weapon, a gun offense charge under New Jersey's Graves Act that carried a mandatory 18 months without parole. On February 23, 2010, Superior Court Judge Edward M. Coleman sentenced him to 5 years in state prison with 18 months of parole ineligibility, with the cover-up sentences running concurrently. It had taken 8 years from the night of the shooting to reach a final sentence. Williams had already paid the Christofi family more than $2 million in 2003 to settle a wrongful death civil suit. But the legal troubles did not end there. On January 5, 2010, 6 days before his guilty plea, Williams crashed his black Mercedes-Benz into a tree near Manhattan's East Village around 3:15 in the morning. His blood alcohol level was measured at 0.19, more than twice the legal limit. On July 30th of that year, he pleaded guilty to misdemeanor DWI in Manhattan and received the maximum 1-year sentence, served at Rikers Island, with roughly 8 months actually served. That sentence ran consecutively with his New Jersey term. Williams was released from custody in April of 2012, having served roughly 27 months total between the New Jersey and Manhattan sentences. On January 26, 2015, in Hortonville, Sullivan County, New York, he lost control of his Jeep and crashed into a utility pole around 11:30 at night. He was charged with misdemeanor DWI after failing a field sobriety test and telling deputies he had swerved to avoid a deer. It was his second DWI in 5 years. The pattern suggested that the lessons of February 2002 had not fully taken hold. As of 2025, Williams has completed an alcohol treatment program and chose to remain at the Epiphany Rehabilitation Center in Florida as a volunteer. He has written about his experiences and speaks publicly about addiction and gun safety. He has said that he struggles with the loss of lives, both the loss of Christofi and the loss of his own father. Kostas Christofi drove a limousine to a party that night and never drove home. His family received a civil settlement. The criminal case took 8 years to resolve, and the man who pulled the trigger, even accidentally, has spent every year since trying to reckon with what a single careless moment cost. 10 athletes. 10 careers that could have been remembered for greatness. Every single one of them traded it for a courtroom, a cell, or a headline they can never take back. Thanks for watching. Click here for the next video.